Get her going. So, hey there. My name is Nick Jerusalem. It's my sister Chelsea Jerusalem, and thank you so much for coming to our class on how to buy a home in today's market. So, and it's if you bought a home before, this is still relevant because man, things have changed a lot. Our family's been doing this since 1989, and I've been doing it for 19 years. Chelsea 20 something plus years. I don't think either one of us have ever seen the market move this rapidly before. So this is going to be a very current and relevant information. So real quick about us, we're a family real estate team. Instead of having a Greek restaurant or something, we help people buy and sell homes. We have a team of 7 people. So we're just making sure that there's always somebody there for you. Most agents are out there breaking their back, trying to do a good job for their clients, but you just can't be everywhere at once. And so we have, in-house transaction coordinating, buyer agent, listing agent, marketing team. And then also we have a mortgage division. Our father, Phil, started our real estate business back in 1989. And then about 12 years ago, kind of retired from the day-to-day of the real estate side and now runs our mortgage side of the business as well. So that's as much as I will say about us. And now we'll just go straight to information about how to buy a home.
All right, so the topics we're going to be covering today, we'll try not to talk too fast, but we'll also try not to take up too much extra time. We're going to do a market update, and then we're going to discuss tax advantages of real estate, just going over rent versus own scenario, the power of leverage when purchasing a home, financing and down payment options, what makes up your credit score, and how to evaluate an investment property. We're also going to just kind of discuss different property types, condos, multifamily versus in ADU. Also, we're going to go over the purchase and sale agreement in brief, kind of the top contingencies that are involved in a purchase and sale agreement. So we'll review that. And then some current negotiation strategies and contingencies, just kind of what's going on these days with what people are allowed to do and are getting to be able to use. And then at the end, we'll have a little Q&A session.
Yeah, feel free to type any questions as we go in the chat box too. So, all right. So with a quick overview. So this is looking at home prices, appreciation, and mortgage rates in King County over the last 37 years. So kind of early 80s up until today. And so kind of see that the market is very cyclical. We've been through 3 separate boom and bust cycles in the last 37 years. And, the kind of most recent one was during the Great Recession. So back in 2007, home prices peaked at $481. Then over 5 years, prices dropped $180,000. And then over the next 5 years after that, they more than doubled. And so our current median price is $897. It peaked at right at $1 million in May this year. It did pull back a little bit every year for the last 20 plus years. There's always kind of a peak and then a pullback through the second half of the year. So we're seeing that taking place right now. Down below, I know it's hard to see, but this also kind of tells you where interest rates are at. And you can see that for the bulk of it, it's in the 7 to 10% range. We'll show you kind of historically what interest rates have looked like too. But ultimately what we're seeing is a return to a balanced market. So this again is looking at King County, showing you from June of last year up until August of this year. In light green shows you homes for sale. The dark is how many is sold. Blue line is new listings coming on the market, and red is pending. So offers accepted, but not yet closed. So you can see we started out the beginning of the year with 556 homes for sale in King County with 2 million people and 18,000 real estate agents. And there's 550 homes for sale. So it was just literally an all-time low for inventory. At that time, you had this surge in rates. They were going from 3% to about 6% from March to June, while you had no inventory to choose from. So there's this kind of compression. There's a lot of demand. There's nothing to choose from, which led to these rapidly rising prices at a very, very competitive market that we had in the first part of the year. So now things are more balanced, which this kind of also illustrates. This is over that same time period. Top line shows you the list to sales price ratio for homes. And then the bottom bar graph here is the average cumulative days on market. So you can see kind of right at the peak of our market in the spring of this year, things got up to 112% a list to sales price. That means on average, homes were going for 12% over their list price. So some way more than that, some less, but that was the average. So the expectation of the market was you're going to get into a bidding war. You're going to probably have to waive all contingencies. And it was very competitive, very stressful, as you might imagine. Whereas today, you can see that things have now transitioned to 96% list to sales price. So on average, people are able to negotiate off the price, maybe get some concessions. And also average time on market is 22 days, where it was at 1.7 days on the market. So instead of going to look at a home and then you go to 7-Eleven to get a drink, and when you come back, it's already sold, you can now go look at a home and go think about it, for a few few days, consult with a lender, crunch numbers. You have time to really kind of assess all of your options, which ultimately I think is a healthy thing for our market to be in. And then this is looking at interest rates going back to 1972, so the last 50 years. And over that time, 7.8% has been the average for over the last 50 years for a 30-year fixed mortgage. I think everyone got kind of the taste of the 2 and 3% money. We really got to remember that that took a global pandemic and a huge crisis and millions of people dying, to create that type of scenario where the government was pouring in trillions of dollars. So that was sort of a once in a lifetime moment where, for mine and Chelsea's career, 6s and 7s is pretty much where rates have been. So right now there's 6.29% is the average for a 30-year fixed mortgage. There's also 15-year and 5/1 ARMs, which we'll touch on what that means later. Mortgages hit an all-time low in January of last year, 2.65%. And then they hit an all-time high back in October of 1981, 18%. So triple where they are today for a little bit of perspective. So why are we doing this class? How do you know when a home is for sale? So usually the for sale sign out in the front yard is kind of the indicator that something's for sale. If it's a hotshot agent, maybe they have their picture on there with their phone and that kind of deal. But essentially that person represents the seller, and that is a listing agent, and they have a fiduciary duty to represent the seller. So prior to 1994, in Washington state, there was no buyer agency representation. So what that meant was all agents were essentially sub-agents of the seller. So like if you went and met somebody at open house and then they toured you around to look at other houses and they are, really listening to your criteria, set up all the information, and you say, great, you're my agent, we find the house and make an offer. Well, at that time, technically they were a sub-agent of the seller. So there was a big outcry from the buyer group and saying, hey, we need representation. So since 94, there has been exclusive buyer agency representation. And then traditionally the seller pays all of the real estate agent costs. So now some tax advantages with Chelsea.
All right, so some tax advantages of real estate purchasing. So when you're going to sell your primary residence, after 2 years of ownership, you're exempt from capital gains taxation. You're exempt up to $500,000 if you're filing jointly, and you're exempt on exemption is $250,000 is the max exemption for a single filing. Mortgage interest is tax deductible, so up to $750,000 of mortgage interest on your primary and second home is deductible. Property tax deductions, you can take a 10K per year on your primary residence. And then rental property, you can actually do a depreciation over the physical structures and improvements, and that's amortized over 27.5-year lifespan. So you take those depreciation hits over time. You can borrow against the asset. So a nice thing about home ownership, if you want to do a cash out refi, home equity loan with credit, or second mortgage, you don't have to pay capital gains tax or income tax. So you can have access to those funds, spend it like you made it without having to pay taxes on that. And then you also can do a 1031 tax exchange where you can carry forward any profit that you've made on your rental property into another property without having to worry about paying the capital gains tax on that. So you can keep on taking your money and move it forward to future investments. Another tax advantage of that is talking about the mortgage interest that is a tax deduction. So when you purchase the home, if we're going to use an example of $500,000 loan amount at a 6% interest, in that scenario, your payment's going to be about $3,000 a month, and that's going to be about $2,500 interest and principal for the beginning years of the loan. If we take that $2,500 a month in interest and take that and divide it by, or times it, multiply it by 12 months, then that becomes $30,000 in mortgage interest that you're paying. That $30,000 translates into a tax deduction that you never had until you purchased a home. And so then you take that, for instance, if you made $80,000 in the year, instead of paying income tax on that full $80,000, they actually take the deduction directly. So they reduce your income, taxable income by that $30,000 interest. So your total taxable income becomes $50,000. So if you were to take that into like a monthly breakdown of what your savings are, if you take that $30,000 at 30% tax bracket, that equals a $9,000 in annual tax savings. And then if we break that down even further, that $9,000 ends up to be about $750 a month. So in theory, your $3,000 a month payment is the equivalent of a $2,250 rent payment.
It's kind of like you get a raise when you buy a home almost.
Yes, exactly. You can actually go to your HR department and say, hey, I bought a home, instead of waiting to the end of the year and getting a rebate at the end of the year, and which some people like to do as kind of a forced savings. But you can actually say, hey, I bought a house. I can actually pay less over the year. I'd like to take that income throughout the year. So you can actually start paying yourself that money right away instead of waiting until the end of the year to get that bonus back. All right, renting versus zoning. So there are some pros to being a renter. You have some flexibility. You can move at the end of your lease. You're not stuck with having to sell the house to figure out how to move. Your landlord is the person who's taking care of all the maintenance. So that something breaks, you call them. You can go place to place. You're going to experience different neighborhoods. You're not stuck in just one place and not being able to make a move. And sometimes it may also be a cheaper option than owning a home in the same neighborhood. There's definitely some cases where the cost of ownership in areas exceeds what your rent made. The cons is your landlord could tell you need to go. So you might not have the stability that you may want to have because they can tell you need to leave with notice.
There we go.
And then the maintenance and upkeep is completely your expense. So you don't have anybody to help you out with that. That is 100% your responsibility if you're an owner. And there's no financial upside. So if you are a renter, you have no financial upside. So you don't gain any equity. You don't get those tax deductions. You're just paying someone else's mortgage over time. And also other tax deductions.
Yeah. So this is taking a look too. So kind of looking at a rental analysis. This is a smattering of neighborhoods over the last 10 years. You can see on the left here, focus more on the Seattle area. The areas that have increased the most over the last 10 years have been more in the suburban markets. So like Federal Way is up 106%, Kent 88%, Linwood up 80%. Seattle core downtown is up 33% over the last 10 years. So, but like a median one bedroom in there is $2,400 a month. The median for a one bedroom in King County is about $1,900 a month right now. So, so kind of looking at how that looks over the course of time, let's just assume that you're paying $2,000 a month in rent, so maybe a nice one bedroom or an okay two bed or something. And if they were increasing at 5%, obviously we saw some a little less than that, some significantly more. Just trying to kind of split the difference there. So you're paying $2,000 a month and it goes up 5% every year. So first year you're paying $2,000. By year 10, same place, nothing's gotten nicer. You're now paying $3,257 for your apartment. Year 20, you could be paying $5,300 a month for that same place. Year 30, $8,000. Year 40 is 14 grand. It's just crazy. Whereas, you know, when you get on a path of buying a home and you get a 30-year fixed mortgage, year one, that's your payment for the rest of the 30 years. You know, it doesn't change unless you refinance and drop it down lower, or you sell or pull money out or things like that. But you control that destiny, whereas this is pretty much the path is up and not to your favor.
The other thing about compounding interest and making it work for you is that interest is actually usually front loaded in a mortgage. So if you have a 30-year fixed mortgage, the beginning of the term, most of your payment is going to be interest. So you'll have a significantly larger deduction during those years. But then once you get towards the middle portion of the term, you're starting to pay more principal, and now you're chipping away at your original principal balance and paying off the loan balance. But also, if you make it work for you, if you just were to make one extra payment per month, you can actually take a whole 7 years off of the term. So just one extra payment per year, and a whole 7 years wipes off the entire term of your 30-year mortgage. Which you can also kind of do if you get into making like a split payment. So if you just do bi-weekly payments, that generally will equate to making that extra payment per year, and also keep you on a nice budget plan.
Yeah, so one of the other kind of great things with real estate is the amount of leverage that it can give you. So, for instance, if you were to buy a $500,000 home with 5% down, you're essentially coming up with $25,000 out of pocket. So that's your initial cash investment. So you have $25,000 and it's controlling a $500,000 asset. So over the last 5 years, home prices have gone up 59%. So, it's been a very healthy, robust time in the real estate market. But let's just, again, assume, using kind of our magic 5% number, what if we just assume a 5% appreciation per year, and which would be $25,000 per year. And that's, again, simple appreciation, not compounding. So let's just keep the math really basic here. So let's say you buy for 500,000, it goes up $25,000 per year. So after 5 years, you had now gained $125,000 in equity. So your $25,000 down payment created $125,000 in equity, which is essentially like a 5-fold or 500% return on your investment. Whereas like with the stock market, if you wanted to have return on $500,000, you need to have that $500,000. So the leverage is not there in the same way.
All right, so financing your purchase, there's the traditional financing options. Luckily, you don't have to come up with all the cash to be able to buy a home because they are getting expensive these days. So most people do finance their purchases. The traditional financing options are the Freddie Fannie products. We've got conventional mortgages, FHA and VA, kind of the usual ones you hear about. And then there's also hard money loan options, which are usually the more that short-term plan. You're going to do some fixes to the property to get it so it is financeable, or you're going to do a flip on the property. Hard money is usually really high interest rate that you're only planning on being in for a very short period of time. Otherwise, it stops making sense really quick. The rehab loans is a product that we had done back in the day. It hadn't been around, but many people were doing. Now lenders are back to working hard on loans. So we've got some rehab loan options where you can actually take the cost of repairing the home. So say, for instance, the home, you find out it needs a new roof. The seller's not in a position that they can put a new roof on, but the lender isn't willing to put a loan on a house that doesn't have a roof that has at least 5 years of life in it. So we can bridge that gap by adding that repair cost into the purchase price and then financing that in. The lender is assured that the funds are there. You are required to make that repair within an X amount of time, and then they come back and re-inspect. But that is an option where you can actually wrap some repairs into the purchase price and into the loan. Also, another option, you can have a co-borrower. So you don't necessarily have to have all the funds, and they don't necessarily have to be a co-occupant to be a co-borrower. So you can have mom or dad sign on, or your rich Uncle Tom, and they can be a helpful co-borrower if they have good credit to help you get a better rate, or potentially help give you better ratios to ensure you have a better rate. Also, owner contracts are out there. There's not a ton of that out there, but that is when the owner doesn't have any liens on the property and they can offer to finance the property for you. So you make payments directly to the lender, to the owner, and they'll charge an interest rate on that. Those are generally shorter term loans because they want to get cashed out on that. So it'll be like a 3 to 5 year term. Sometimes you can get like 7 years, but usually owners want to get cashed out sooner than you would have happen on a traditional loan. There's the 30-year fixed mortgage, a 15-year fixed mortgage. Those are both kind of the standard, like fixed term mortgages. And then adjustable rate mortgages are now becoming a thing again, which hadn't been the case when rates were so low. People wanted a forever commitment to a 2% interest rate. But at this point in time, getting in the door, an adjustable rate mortgage can be a good option if you're not planning on being there for ever and ever. That might be the best option for you. There's also the potential to do an interest rate buy down, where you can buy down the rate for either a temporary amount of time or for the full term of the loan by adding some extra funds up front. There's also options where the seller can actually do a credit to you to also buy down your rate term.
Yeah, the first 2 homes I bought were interest rates were in the 7s. And so I ended up getting 5-year adjustable rate mortgages and refinanced them because rates improved. And so the phrase, we didn't make it up, but we definitely are stealing it, is marry the home and date the rate and divorce your rent. That's basically the.
All right. So benefits of putting more money down. If you put 20% down or more on your, you can eliminate PMI on your primary residence, or when you're making a purchase, they want to see that 20% limit is kind of that boundary of being able to avoid private PMI, which we'll talk about a little bit further what that is. You can get lower interest rates by having a larger down payment. Obviously, your lower monthly payment because your basis for your loan amount is lower because you have lower a mortgage starting point. And then recasting is a thing where you can actually put money down later on. So you may come up with another lump sum that you want to put down to reduce your amount that you're owed, and they'll actually re-amortize the loan based on that additional. So it's as if you'd put that money down in the beginning. They recast the loan based on that re-amortization. So you don't, so I guess the common questions, you don't need 20% down to put a home. There's lots of non 20% down programs out there. You can put 3% down for a conventional. You don't have to do anything crazy. You'll just end up with PMI if you put less than that 20% down. First-time homebuyer incentives, yes, they are still available. They generally come in the form of lower interest rates, or sometimes they'll have a reduced closing cost, so they'll be able to have lower closing costs. So there are different first-time homebuyer incentives out there. It's kind of a case-by-case basis how you qualify. A first-time buyer is somebody who hasn't owned a home in the past 3 years. So that doesn't mean it's the first home you've ever purchased. It just means you haven't been a homeowner for the past 3 years. And there's actually is a difference.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I would say they can vary from city to city. So like, Seattle has their own down payment assistance program. Tacoma has their own down payment assistance program. Washington State has a Housing Finance Commission state bond program. It's very area and income specific. It changes on your household size. You have to take a specific class. It's a 5-hour class to get a certificate for a lot of these programs, which we teach those too. All up to say,
well, those are the down payment assistance, though. Those aren't right. The first time buyer program. So there's both of those things available. But a lot of them do require little classes that you have to take, and it definitely case by case. Like can vary so widely. Even and a lot of them income restricted as well. So you have to make at least this much, but not more than that much. So many little moving parts. And then also the type of property and the down payment. So you do have to put a different amount of down payment if you're doing an investment property, or if it's your part-time residence versus a full-time home. And then your rate is generally higher on an investment purchase versus an owner-occupied. Also, you have a higher rate if you buy a condo versus a single-family home. Nick, can you cover this? My battery's running low, so I need to go run and grab my cord.
Okay. All right. So other common questions. So, it is pretty common for buyers to put the minimum down when they're purchasing their first home. So the minimum loan or down payment amounts for the kind of the various loan products that are out there. FHA, it's a Federal Housing Administration. It's a government insured loan. They allow a little bit more leniency with credit scores as well as debt to income ratios. Their minimum down payment is 3.5%. They do have mortgage insurance, and it does come with a little bit higher upfront and ongoing premium than you might find with like a conventional loan. Conventional loans are available in 3 to 5% down payment range. Those also carry mortgage insurance or private mortgage insurance rather, if you're putting less than 20% down. VA is the Veterans Administration. So if you've served in the armed forces, you have the ability to get a VA loan, which is 0 down, no mortgage insurance on that product. They don't, there's many other great options, and as there should be for the folks that have served. And as we touched on, there are some down payment assistance and 0 down options. There's even that also can vary on funding that's available. So there's federal bonds and grants that go away quickly, but there's state level ones that again might be available, and then they run out of funds after 6 months or that kind of thing. So that's a moving target. if it's something that you're thinking you might need to utilize, definitely get in touch with a lender, and that would be a deep dive conversation for sure. But and you can always put more than the minimum amount down. So you could say you're going to put 5% down and then later decide you're putting 7% or 10% down. So, but what you can't do is say you're going to put 5% down, or say you're going to put 10% down and then all of a sudden try to put down less. Requires special permission from the seller, and more of a conversation we need to get into right now. But
you can always do more, but you can't always do less.
Yep. All right, you juice back up.
I am reconnected. The heat is off. I was getting like they had the battery dying block up across the screen. So I was like, like, what am I reading? Okay. So down payments and property types, is there a difference? So if you are going to purchase a primary residence, they do have minimum payments depending on different loan programs. So for your primary residence, usually the 3% is kind of the standard conventional minimum down payment that you would see there, and you could go up from there. On second homes, they want to see at least a 10% minimum down on a conventional loan. If it's an investment property where you're never planning on occupying it, it's just going to be purely for an investment purpose, that is a 20 to 25% anticipated deposit on that. And there you cannot do FHA or down payment assistance if it's a investment property. It has to be owner occupied for FHA or for the down payment assistance and VA. So PMI, we talked about it. So private mortgage, that's private mortgage insurance. That actually insures the lender. It doesn't insure you. So it protects the lender against you defaulting on your loan. So the lower money that you put down, the more that the asset has to be the security for the loan. So the less money you put into the game, the more protection the lender wants in case they have to take that house back from you in order to make themselves whole. So this ensures them that if there's a gap between what you owe and what's going on with the default on the house, that they can have their money covered. And it's charged as a monthly expense to you. That rate can vary, depends, and actually it can be tied to, it's tied to your credit as well. So if you bad credit, you'll pay more PMI, higher rate. So speaking of debt to income ratios and credit,
yeah, so these are kind of some of the key things that lenders look at when they're trying to qualify you and determine how much of a loan you qualify for. So one is the debt to income ratio. So looking at your gross income and dividing that by your revolving monthly debt. So that'd be things like if you have a car payment or a student loan payment or your minimum payment on a credit card, that would be the amount they would consider for that. Or if you have other, mortgage payments, things of that nature. So they look at your gross income divided by that revolving debt. And so like for conventional financing, typically they don't want you to have more than 45% debt to income ratio. So that means if you make $10,000 gross a month, you can't have more than $4,500 a month in total revolving debt with your mortgage and all those other things we just listed off. So other things that can drive your mortgage rates and what you qualify for are your credit scores. So the minimum scores for an FHA loan is 580. Conventional requires a minimum of 620. VA technically doesn't have a minimum credit score requirement, but most lenders still stipulate their own overlay of at least a 580 credit score. So what makes up your credit score? So it's comprised by these three credit bureaus, Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. They are private companies. I don't know, they have a lot of control of your life and nobody really put them in charge, but they do have a lot of power, and it's important to really mind your credit because that can dictate what you qualify for, how much, and so forth. So credit score ranges from 350 to 850. They typically look at the middle of your three score, what they call the tri-merge score. But and if you're a couple vying together, they look at the lowest middle score of the two people typically. So, so how your score is made up, the biggest thing is from your past payment performance. That's 35%. So if you miss a payment on a mortgage or a credit card or car payment, that's going to have the biggest impact in tanking your score quickly. The amount you owe also has a big impact. So if you're always like right near the limit of maxing out all of your credit cards, that can also have a negative impact on your credit score. Ideally, you try to keep it somewhere between 30 to 50% of your balance. If it's always at zero, that's not necessarily a good thing because then it looks like you could go rent out a bunch of debt on a whim. And also they want to see that you're actively using your credit, that you're borrowing money and can pay it back. Whereas if it's just never being touched and it's in the freezer, you're not really actively using it. So it's hard to really establish credit in that point. So
they want to know that they want to think that they're going to be able to make at least some kind of money off of you. That's the point of borrowing money to you. It's not like, so they do kind of want to see that there's some chance that they might get some interest earned off of their borrowing to you.
The other things that make up your credit score, so credit history. So if you've had, if you just turned 18 and got your first credit card, it can take a minute, to really accrue some history. Like for buying a home, oftentimes you need to have 2 years of some history, not for all loan programs, but that's sort of the general standard. But types of credit has a bit of an impact too. So if you have a mortgage and a credit card and a student loan and a car payment, so just again, a mix that shows you're good at managing debt, essentially, that usually plays to your favor. And then inquiries, so that you're not like going out and constantly applying for more credit cards or sources of debt and getting declined, or trying to go run out a bunch of cards all at once. So kind of shifting gears now and looking at how to evaluate an investment property. So a lot of different ways to approach investment in real estate. So one would be kind of the quickest term is a flip. So that's where you buy it, fix it, and then turn around and try to sell it for a profit. It can be very high risk because you're kind of subject to changing market cycles. It's also taxed as income because it's a short-term purchase and sale. So it is kind of in the highest tax bracket from a real estate standpoint. If you're getting a fixer home, sometimes there can be challenges with obtaining financing. If you're getting a mortgage and getting a loan, they usually want to ensure that the home is habitable, so that it, that it has a roof that's good for at least 5 years, and there's no broken windows, and needs to have functioning heat and running water. And oftentimes a flip home is a home that doesn't have those things. And that's how you make your margins, because it has to be sold at a significant discount due to the distress condition of the property. So with that, you sometimes have to be an all cash buyer to buy these types of properties, or use, Chelsea mentioned earlier, what's called a hard money lender. That's where they don't have your usual lender guidelines and overlays, but they're also come with very high costs. Oftentimes it's 3% in upfront points, and then 10 to 12% in interest. So it can be significantly more than what like a traditional loan would be. So another option is to buy a home, rehab it, rent it, and then refinance it. You can pull out up to 75% of the value of an investment property. So as long as you have 25% equity in the home, you can, in theory, pull that money out and either then take it and reinvest it, or if you buy a home, add value to it, and now you're able to get your money back because you bought it for 500, put in 100, and now it's worth 750, and you, in theory, created $150,000 in equity. So different ways to kind of not have your funds permanently tied up. You can also do an addition or an accessory dwelling unit conversion. So this is sort of, instead of going out and buying something new altogether, maybe utilizing something you already have. I'm seeing this a lot, kind of becoming more popular in kind of urban infill areas where they're starting to build, an attached unit or detached unit within a lot in a dense urban area, and then they can sell that one little piece off or split them off. So multifamily is also another investment option. If it's 4 units or less, then you get traditional residential financing. If it's 5 units or more, it becomes considered commercial financing. And then that's a whole different monster in terms of terms, rates, and how that's
liability
sorted too. Yeah, there's different liability as well. So in terms of other investment in real estate options, so you're buying a rental home, again, as we said, 20 to 25% down. In this case, if you put 25% down, it generally will give you a lower rate, better terms. An investment property do typically carry higher interest rates than if you're buying a primary residence. Usually it's around 1% more. That's, again, a usual number. If you want to have the property rented out and you want to enlist a third-party property management company, the kind of industry standard is that if you'd like them to find the tenant for you, do all the screening, all the showings, then they'll collect the first month's rent as their fee for that. And then if you want the ongoing management, so somebody that's going to collect the fee, deal with the phone calls, repairs, what have you, all the tremendous amount of legal liabilities that come with being a landlord, then they usually keep 10% of the monthly rent thereafter. So you can also purchase a home, live in there, and then convert it into a rental. That was mine and Chelsea's first paths to investing in real estate, was buying teeny tiny condos and rent in Fairwood area and live there. And then eventually moved out and rented them out. So, and hung on to them. So multifamily options we mentioned, as well as accessory dwelling units, and then vacation rentals. So that was pretty in vogue during the early days of COVID, maybe not as hot now, just more given the higher interest rates make it a little trickier to pencil having a secondary home or that kind of thing. But again, vacation rentals, you can buy a second home with 10% down, and then, get into a nightly rental type of situation with the property. So different types of homes that are out there beyond just general single family residential homes. A condominium is where you have, shared common elements. Everybody has a shared ownership of the land, but then you own an individual unit within that building or complex. So you have monthly homeowners dues that go towards the common expenses. So things like keeping up the siding, the common areas, the hallways, the parks, all the sidewalks, that type of thing. And they can also often go towards a lot of your utilities. So water, sewer, garbage are often included with your homeowners dues. Typically, electricity and gas will often be separate metered bills, though. And so it sometimes can be things to consider with condos is one, that it can kind of be a nice set it and forget it, and that you're really kind of mostly responsible for the sheetrock in. Big things, roof windows, that's sort of the association responsibility. You pay for that with the homeowner's dues, but you're not going to be worried about all of a sudden have to go deal with replacing the roof yourself, if you had a single family home. So it does give some of that peace of mind, but it does have some of that cost involved too. There are rules when you own a condo, so everybody's sharing all the space, and sometimes those rules can limit what you might be able to do. So for instance, they might limit what kind of pets you can have, or whether you can rent your condo out. Like maybe there's 100 units in the building and they say only 50% can be rented because they want to try to maintain some odor occupancy and that type of sense of community there. So you can also convert a multifamily property or an ADU into a condominium. So like have a house with a basement apartment conversion and split what they say condoify it and then sell them off into different units, or have a detached accessory dwelling unit where you build like a little cottage on a back of a property, split them off and sell them off too. So that's another way to sort of condoify in a non-traditional way. Multifamilies, so those are properties that are, typically 4 units or less, or residential multifamily. 5 units or more, or again, get into the commercial realm. So one option too is you can actually purchase a multifamily property and occupy one of the units and utilize 75% of the anticipated rental income to help you qualify. So like, say you want to buy a fourplex and put 5% down. And so you can buy, maybe you buy $1 million fourplex, put 5% down, and then you live in one of the units, rent out the other 3, and the rental income helps you qualify for that larger purchase acquisition. And then maybe later down the road, you move out and then continue to keep that as a rental portfolio, for instance. So with the multifamily property, you don't have any HOAs because you own it all. So you don't have any of the rules limiting that space as well. And again, as I mentioned earlier, you could potentially convert that into condominiums and sell off parts of it at some point down the road. Accessory dwelling units. So that's when it's something that's either attached to a primary residence or where it's considered border income. So it's kind of like you're having a roommate. But it helps you in the end for your monthly net costs, but you can't use that income to actually qualify for the loan like you could in a multifamily type of scenario. So, but what you can do is buy a property as an owner occupied down payment. So 3 to 5% down, get the favorable interest rates, have somebody renting out this, basement unit or accessory dwelling unit that helps offset your monthly costs. And you can legally rent it out as long as you occupy one of the units within a mother-in-law apartment example. So now on to the actual home buying process.
Oh, the process. When you come to start buying a property, we usually want to figure out first, we have to figure out how we're going to acquire the funds, like get the acquisition of funds determined. So whether that's the mattress that you've got stuffed full of cash, or some magical lotto money, or most likely you're talking to a mortgage broker or lender that can help you acquire the funds through some type of loan source. So once we get you set up, usually with the lender, you get that discussion hashed out, figure out what's going to be best for you based on your goals. Are we doing an adjustable rate because we're only going to be there for 5 years? Are we planning on having life changes coming soon? loan? Are we locked into a 30-year fixed? How do we want to work this out? Once we determine how much we've got to work with, then we can start shopping. So it's like, yay, we've got the money. And then we can decide what area, location, location, location. Everybody wants to make sure they're in the right area. So we usually start with, what area do you really ideally want to be in? What's driving you to that area? What can, you know, where do we want to land? And then we can start dialing in what are the features of the home for what we can afford within that area. We can always go back and forth between what kind of area and what kind of property. We can always retool those things, but the money is kind of our stuck fixed figure. So we figure out money first, then we can figure out area and property, and we can expand the area if we need to, if we're really set on certain property features, or we can dial in the property and like remove some of those extra fancy features. Maybe we don't need that extra bathroom because we really, really need to be in Redmond. We also, when we're looking at properties, we're not just searching the MLS. We're always also open to doing off-market deals, which has been something that we've done for years and years. For sale by owners, we're more of a thing before and might start coming up again. We've worked with a number of for sale by owners, foreclosure acquisitions. We know how to help people do that as well. So just if it's not listed for sale doesn't mean that we're not able to help.
Yeah, or like there's a certain neighborhood somebody wants to be in, we'll send letters to everybody that lives there, door knock the neighborhood, just getting creative to make sure that we're finding the best options.
And now for a high level review of the purchase and sale agreement. So this is just kind of some to get you familiar with the contract. This is a standard MLS purchase and sale agreement. So the 100,000 homes sold in the MLS in this past year, this is pretty much the documents that were used to transact that. So this is, first we just list who the legal buyer is in the contract. We also make sure to describe legally what the property is. An address doesn't necessarily mean that's the property. That could be the mailbox. We do not want to sell you a mailbox. So we make sure we have how the property is legally described with the title company and with the county. Included items. So there's some extra things that people assume like or would like to have included with the house. We want to make sure that what you expect to have included is included. Anything attached to the house is generally included, as far as like shelving and blinds and like your kitchen cabinets, like nobody's supposed to take those, but the appliances are kind of a negotiable item. So we make sure if you want to have those, we have that included. Earnest money. So earnest money is essentially your deposit. It's a sign of good faith to the seller. It's the security deposit that kind of puts the feet to the fire in the contract that shows that you mean business. It's generally around 1% of the purchase price, and that does get applied towards the down payment or closing costs at closing. So it's not just goes away to the seller and disappears. It goes into a third-party account and is held there. In case you have any legal cause of getting out of the contract, escrow is authorized to release that back to the buyer. So if there's a reason within the contract for the buyer to not have proceeded to closing, that money comes back to the buyer. But if the buyer was to default with no contractual excuse, then that becomes at default. We give that to the seller, and that's their sole remedy as long as we check that box upon default, and they cannot come back and sue you after the fact for non-performance.
And then it also can be used as sort of a tool for the offer. So, a higher earnest money can show us stronger intent, and that you're earnest to buy the home, or if you're getting into a competitive situation, maybe two offers are identical, but one has a higher earnest money, and that in itself could win the day. So it's another part of the strategy. And typically it's deposited within 3 business days of mutual acceptance. So it's funds you need to have sort of liquid and available near the beginning of the process. Your down payment funds are not needed until the actual day of closing when you wire them. So earnest money would be the one kind of more on the upfront basis.
Upfront. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess, upfront costs, inspection, earnest money, and appraisal. Okay, so then title insurance. So we instruct there to be title insurance and who the agent is there. So we get to choose who the agent is. Usually we go with who the seller has already got preliminary title opened with, so we can make sure everything's good there. And then we also ask for the escrow agent to prorate the utilities. So they make sure that any utilities that were the seller's responsibility up to the day of closing are paid off in full. And they'll also prorate that so that you are not responsible, you don't inherit any unpaid utility debt.
Yeah,
and that's for the lienable utilities. So your power bill is generally something you have to do in your own name, but anything that is going to be liened against the property, if it's not paid, that's escrow's job to help take care of if we check that box.
And escrow, they're the third party that handles your actual in-person signing of documents, the recording with the county, signing the mortgage documents, sort of the money handler in between party, essentially. So.
The closing date. So we get to, so usually you can put the closing date is kind of stuck with how long it's going to take for your financing to get completed. Occasionally it can be helpful to allow for additional time after closing in the negotiation. That can be a tool for if you're not necessarily increasing the price, but if the seller needs to go somewhere, they don't have the funds already to get moved over, and they need some time to move all their stuff because they've been in the house for 30 years and they want to make a move, you can offer them some extra time after closing to stay in the home, as opposed to offering additional money. And that can be maybe worth more to them than having to go through the process of moving twice and the cost and the hassle of doing that. Maybe a few extra days could be worth tens of thousands of dollars to them in just the gesture. This is a condo purchase and sale agreement. So there are a few things that are different about this. Notably, the condominium has the association that Nick had mentioned before. So with the condominium, you have the homeowners association. And with that, you also have the legal right to review the association documents. So if it's new construction, the condominium will offer a public offering statement, which will go over kind of what they have pre-set up and what their intentions are, their budget to date. If it's a resale of the unit, so it's not the initial sale from the developer, but somebody has owned the unit before and they're selling it to you as a secondary sale, then the full budget and operation documents of the condominium are furnished to you. You have days to review that to make sure. It's usually many, many pages of rules and regulations and budget documents. You definitely want to review that because you're inheriting that homeowners association when you buy the property. So you don't just get the unit, you get the homeowners association that comes with it. So if they're not managing their money well, you're going to be dealing with that. So you want to make sure you do look at those documents in detail. We always make it a rule to make sure to look them over as well when we're helping somebody make a purchase in a condominium. Condominiums also have monthly assessments. So there's some lines in here where you can make sure that the monthly assessment is we know exactly how much that is. And in instance that there possibly is a special assessment, which is something that you want to make sure you know if you're getting into what that is in detail. But if there is an additional assessment in addition to the annual, just the regular monthly assessment, we also make sure we know exactly what that is and clarify that in this. Financing and contingency, that is definitely a typical contingency. Most people do need financing in order to purchase a property. And with that, you are able to have the protection in here for different parts of that process. So for instance, you are disclosing what type of loan you are getting, so that the seller also knows, are you getting a conventional, are you getting FHA, how much down payment you're putting. On this line, we put the most that you're, like the minimum amount that you're willing to put down, but you can always put more than this down, but you want to make sure that you're not over, like saying you're willing to put more down on this line, because you have to at least put this much down in a contract. If you want to put any less down, then we have to ask the seller for permission. And then you have 5 days from acceptance of the offer is the typical timeline to make full loan application. So you have to get this contract submitted to your lender, tell them, I want to buy a house, I want to buy this house, and I need you to submit my loan application. You have to do that within 5 days.
Yeah, so if you're shopping lenders or something like that, and you do that on day 6, then you could potentially nullify your financing contingency unless you get seller's permission to change after the fact. So,
yes. And the financing contingency, so the standard default timeline is 21 days. The financing contingency may or may not automatically expire depending on how the offer is presented and how it's negotiated. So the seller may have to give you notice to perform. In that instance, they have to tell you, you have to waive your financing contingency, and you have the right to choose to or not to waive your financing contingency, or you can check the box that says at day 21, it's just going to automatically waive. So that's part of the negotiation of the offer, whether it does or does not waive. And we're seeing that trend towards it not being an automatic waiver, as it had been an automatic waiver in a lot of offers previously. You can negotiate for the seller to pay towards your closing costs. So closing costs, in addition to your down payment at the time you go to purchase a property, there are some additional fees. So there's the down payment, of course, and then there's title fees and escrow fees, which can be part of your closing costs, as well as the loan fees, which tend to be the larger portion of what your closing costs are. So you can actually get up to 6% if the lender permits for you to get a credit back from the seller on your closing costs. And so that can be negotiated into the offer as a seller credit. If not, then it's the buyer's responsibility. Also, part of the financing contingency, you're protected in the instance that appraisal comes in less than sales price. So appraisal is essentially the lender wants to make sure that the house is a proper security instrument for the loan. So they want to make sure it's a good asset. Is this house worth enough? I'm giving them $700,000. Is this a $700,000 house? So they can evaluate that in person, or sometimes they will actually just do an online evaluation if they feel confident about value enough. They may not even send anybody out, and they'll do an appraisal waiver. Well, they'll just be like, oh, yep, we're confident, we're good to go. So there's a bunch of different versions of how the lender will evaluate this, but in the instance that the appraisal comes in less than what the purchase price is, we do have the opportunity to renegotiate the property's sales price to come to a point where we can proceed to closing, or if we can't, then that's not a default by the buyer. It's protected by the financing contingency, and that would be earnest money back to buyer. Sorry, we weren't able to figure out how to close the gap. On FHA loans, an appraisal is actually attached to the property. So for any other conventional type of loan product, if that sale doesn't work, the buyer could move on and the seller moves on to a new buyer. New buyer comes with a new appraisal, and that could come in at a totally different value because appraisers are people and they have opinions. And so maybe that new appraiser comes up with a different opinion. But with an FHA loan, if the next buyer is an FHA buyer, that FHA loan, that appraisal is stuck to that property for 90 days. So that unless that next buyer is not an FHA buyer, that seller is stuck with that valuation of their property until 91 days later. We've got our inspection contingency. So wow, yeah, that had been a major thing that was going on that's changed in the market. People were waiving inspections left, right, and center, like it was very normal to just, and the sellers were also doing inspections on their own homes, which we used to be adamant about, like, don't just over disclose. You don't want to like tell people what's wrong with your house if they don't think it's wrong. But in this past market, we were advising people, it's, we got to go ahead and do our best to help buyers know what's going on. So pre-inspections were becoming very, very popular. Sellers were furnishing inspections on their own homes. Now they're not doing that. They're waiting for the buyer to get the offer accepted. The buyer can do their own inspection with their own licensed inspector. This is definitely a more comfortable, I think, as Nick mentioned, like healthy way of working through a contract, because relying on the seller's inspector had layers of things that were just not ideal. So now buyers are able to have an inspection contingency. Cost of an inspection is between $400 and probably $600 now. If you have a condo, it's going to be less money because they have less to inspect. If it's a big, huge house and they've got basements and nooks and crannies to go into, it will cost you more money. And then I think we have another page on this.
10 days typically is the time to get the inspection
Yes,
complete.
well, 10 days is the standard default, but we generally try and shrink that up as much as we can, because 10 days is a very long time to wait to figure out if there's an issue with the property. Because if we find out on day 10 that there's something wrong, we then have to start negotiating, trying to figure out how to repair the issue, and we don't have any runway left to, like, the loan's going to be closing in 20 days. So we need time to negotiate the repairs, have time for repairs to get completed. So we generally try and tighten that up to 5 days or less, so that we can get through that as fast as possible and move on to knowing what we're doing with the house, and not have you day 20 still not sure if you're buying that house or not. This is part of the reason why it can get to way down the road. There's all these timelines that can be accommodated during the inspection. If there's repairs requested that, like, the inspector comes up with ideas of repairs that he's outside of his scope, you could have an additional 5 days to investigate that. There's 3 days to ask for repairs. Essentially, though, at the end of the day, if we do ask for repairs from the seller, they do have to have the repairs completed in a commercially acceptable manner. And it does have to be completed prior to closing, so that we have time to go back and see the house as repaired and make sure it's all good prior to closing. So you're not sending the money off to the seller and figuring out, oh no, they never even fixed the toilet.
That's it.
We're going to end with they never fixed the toilet. Oh.
Now, this is obviously a very quick abbreviated excerpts from just kind of the most key things that are in most contracts. So we will also send, along with the slides, a copy of like a purchase and sale agreement that has the full, all the addenda and kind of the most common parts of the contract. There's going to be some updates rolling out to that soon as well, but we'll send you kind of all the current versions of that too. So you have that for reference and you can read it ahead of time. So you're not, when you find the perfect home, all of a sudden reading everything then. So, but yeah, that is our 101. So
and there's tons of additional contingencies. We were just touching on the most standard ones that are included. So financing and inspection, we generally would advise you include those. And if you don't, you're probably rolling the dice on ways that you don't want to.
Yeah, so if you have any questions, you can call or text us at that number, or email us and visit us at happyhometeam.com. But yeah, thank you so much for
Q&A wise. Do we have any in the chat
Nothing
box?
in the chat. Yeah, so if you have anything, feel free to fire away. Otherwise, so appreciate you guys coming in, and everybody have a lovely evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.